I thought my grandpa would scold me for being dramatic, but his next sentence made my stomach drop when he asked who had been signing my name. The car wasn't the real problem. The real problem was that my family had been living my life on paper. They told my husband I was unstable. But they forgot one thing. My grandpa didn't build his empire by believing lies. When he opened the glove box, the document inside proved the entire family was a fraud. My name is Hazel Gomez, and at this exact moment, the only thing keeping me upright is the terrifying weight of the 5-pound sleeping infant strapped to my chest. The wind in February doesn't just blow. It hunts. It seeks out the gaps in your scarf and the holes in your gloves. It finds the skin you thought you had covered and bites down hard, leaving a stinging numbness that feels like fire. I lowered my head against the gale, my boots crunching on the gray slush covering the breakdown lane of the county road. My breath came out in short, ragged clouds of white steam that vanished instantly into the gray sky. My hands were raw inside thin wool mittens. My fingers were wrapped so tightly around the rubber handlebars of the bicycle that they had locked into claws. The bike was a rusting mountain trekker that had belonged to my husband Caleb from high school.
It was too big for me.
The seat was too high, and the rear tire completely flat. Every step was a battle. I had to drag the dead weight of the metal frame through the sludge. The rim ground against the asphalt with a metal-on-metal screech that set my teeth on edge. Scrape, drag, scrape, drag.
Noah stirred against my chest.
I stopped immediately, dropping the bike with a clatter and cupping my hands over the carrier to shield him from the wind. "Sure," I whispered, my voice cracking. "It's okay, Noah. Mama's here. We're almost there." I was lying. We were not almost there. The pharmacy was still 2 miles away. I checked the side pocket of the diaper bag, slung awkwardly.
"Hazel," he said.
His voice was gravelly, low, and steady. It wasn't a question. It was a summons. I tried to speak, but my jaw was so stiff from the cold that I could only manage a nod. I felt small. I felt ashamed. I wanted to hide the bike. I wanted to hide my dirty boots. Frank leaned forward slightly, the leather of the seat creaking. His gaze shifted from me to the empty road behind us, then back to my face. "I gave you a car, right?" The question hung in the freezing air between us. It was simple, factual. But in my family, facts were dangerous. Facts were weapons. I could lie. I could say it was in the shop. I could say I preferred the exercise. I could say I lost the keys. That is what my mother would want me to say. That is what would keep the peace. But I looked at Frank Callahan. He built an empire of logistics and shipping by smelling desperation and weakness. If I lied now, he would roll up that window and drive away, and I would never see him again. He did not tolerate liars. I swallowed the lump of fear in my throat. "At Bell's," I said. My voice was thin, trembling, not just from the cold, but from the sheer terrifying act of speaking the truth. "I have never had the keys. Not once." The silence that followed was louder than the wind. Frank did not explode. He did not shout.
He did not demand to know why.
He just sat there, expression unreadable. His eyes drifted down to the diaper bag on my hip. He saw the way the fabric sagged. He saw the outline of the nearly empty bottle. His lips pressed together into a thin white line. It was a microscopic movement, but for Frank Callahan, it was the equivalent of a primal scream. He raised one hand and signaled to the front of the car. "Get in," he commanded. Now the driver's door opened instantly. A large man in a dark suit stepped into the cold without flinching. I recognized him vaguely, Arthur. He had been Frank's driver for 20 years. Arthur moved with efficient speed, rounding the car and opening the re. The car approached the intersection. To the right was the turn toward my parents' estate, the temporary home that had become my prison. Arthur did not slow down. He did not signal. The car glided straight through the intersection, continuing toward the city, toward the highway, toward Frank's territory. My breath hitched. We were not going back. I looked at Frank again. This time he turned his head slowly to face me. The hardness in his eyes had not softened, but the focus had shifted. He was no longer assessing me. He was protecting me. "This isn't about the car," he said quietly. His voice held no doubt. He glanced at the sleeping baby against my chest, then looked straight at me. What did they take, Hazel? The question unlocked something in my chest. It wasn't a sob. It was anger, cold, sharp, and crystalline. For 6 months, I had been told I was unstable, ungrateful,
Confused.
that my memory was faulty, that my math was wrong, that I was lucky they were even letting me stay. But Frank Callahan did not ask if they took anything. He asked what? I looked down at Noah. His tiny hands were curled into fists. I thought about rationing formula. I thought about dragging a rusted bike through snow while my sister drove my SUV to the spa. I thought about counting coins for milk. Everything, I said finally. The word hung between us, heavy and undeniable. Frank's jaw tightened. He nodded once, slowly, as if confirming something he had already suspected. The warmth of the car seeped into my bones, chasing away the cold that had lodged itself deep inside me. For the first time in months, my thoughts felt clear. I realized I could not go back. Not to that house. Not to that version of myself. My mind drifted back to the beginning. It hadn't started with cruelty. It had started with concern. When Caleb received his deployment orders, we were optimistic. It was a long tour, nearly a year, but stable. We had savings. We had plans. But I was 7 months pregnant. Our lease was E. Then came the car. That was the cut that hurt the most because it came from Belle. My grandfather had given me the SUV as a baby shower gift. Safe, reliable, fully paid for. He wanted his great-grandson protected. 2 weeks after I moved back home, the keys vanished from my nightstand. I found Belle in the driveway, loading yoga mats and shopping bags into the trunk. When I asked what she was doing, she laughed, a light, tinkling sound that made my skin crawl. She told me a car that wasn't driven regularly would be ruined. She said she was doing me a favor by keeping it in rotation. I told her I needed it for pediatrician visits. That's when my father stepped in. He sat me down at the dining table and looked at me with that heavy disappointment I remembered from childhood. He told me I wasn't in a state to drive. He said my hormones slowed my reaction time. He said he couldn't live with himself if I crashed with a baby inside. So Belle took the car. She drove it to spin class, to brunch, to photo shoots. She posed with it on social media, calling it her new ride. And I was given the bicycle. They framed it as health, as humility. My mother said the fresh air would help me lose the baby weight. She said walking would teach me discipline. They reminded me how expensive gas was, how generous they were to house me. That was why I walked in the snow. But control over my movement was nothing compared to what they did to my money. Before Caleb left, we had savings.
$6,000.
Emergency money, plus his military pay, went directly into our joint account. Mail started disappearing. Diapers I ordered never arrived. Bank statements stopped coming. My online password suddenly didn't work. When I tried to reset it, the verification code went to a phone number I no longer controlled. When I confronted my mother, she didn't deny it. She told me I'd been making erratic purchases. She said she had secured the account for my own protection. She said she was holding the gaslighting was the worst part. Worse than the money. Worse than the car. Because it made me doubt my own mind. They never hit me. They never starved my baby. They did something far more precise. They rewrote reality. If I misplaced something, it was proof I was unstable. If I questioned a number, it meant my memory was failing. If I cried, it was hysteria. If I stayed quiet, it was depression. Every reaction became evidence against me. My mother spoke gently when others were around. Concerned. Selfless. She told neighbors how hard postpartum had been for me, how brave she was for stepping in. People praised her. They praised my family. And I smiled because smiling was safer than resisting. At night, I lay awake listening to the house breathe. I stared at the ceiling and tried to remember who I had been before I moved back in. A competent adult. A woman with a job. A wife who handled her own finances. I repeated those facts in my head like a prayer, afraid they would slip away. The worst fear wasn't that they would take Noah. It was that they would convince everyone I was unfit to keep him, that they would document my episodes, collect their lies, and present them as proof. I started keeping mental notes,
Dates.
conversations, inconsistencies. But without a phone I controlled, without money, without transportation, those notes lived only in my head. And they told me my head couldn't be trusted. Every day was smaller than the last. My world shrank to the nursery, the kitchen, and the silent stretches of hallway in between. Until the road. Until the snow. Until my grandfather's car rolled up beside me like a black line drawn through everything they had built. I looked at Frank Callahan as the city drew closer. He was still silent, still calculating. But I understood something then. He had not asked me to prove anything. He had not questioned my emotions. He had not doubted my memory. He believed me. That realization was almost painful. Trust felt foreign after. My throat tightened as I stared at the documents. My name was there in clean, confident strokes, signatures that looked right at a glance, but wrong in the way a stranger's smile is wrong. Too practiced. Too deliberate. I didn't sign those, I whispered. I know, Frank said. He closed the folder with a soft, decisive snap. You don't round your letters like that. That was it. That small detail shattered everything they had built. My mother's careful concern. My father's lectures.
Belle-Lothaire.
All of it collapsed into something ugly and criminal. They told my husband I was unstable, I said. The words came faster now, spilling out. They told him I was confused, that I couldn't handle money, that they were protecting me. Frank's jaw hardened. They were protecting themselves. Arthur pulled the car forward again. We drove deeper into the city, into places that required badges and appointments. Lawyers' offices. Private banks. Buildings where lies didn't survive paper trails. Frank made calls. Short ones. Precise ones. Names were spoken. Instructions given. Every conversation ended the same way, with compliance. By the time the sun dipped behind the skyline, everything had changed. Accounts were frozen. Access was restored to me. Alerts were sent to Caleb's command. Not accusations.
Facts.
Verified and documented. Frank never raised his voice. He never comforted me with soft words. He did something far more powerful. He corrected the imbalance. When we finally stopped, we were at his house. Not the estate where I had been trapped, but a place designed for security and quiet. A nurse waited inside. A guest room already prepared. A bassinet beside the bed. You'll stay here, Frank said, with the baby. What about my parents? I asked. He met my eyes. They don't get access to you anymore. For the first time since Noah was born, the decision wasn't framed as protection or concern. It was simply mine. That night, I fed my son without counting scoops.
He slept